Hi, today I'll be continue talking about the Lord of the Rings series, in particular book number 4, which is the second part of The Two Towers. And in this book, the reader is following Sam and Frodo as they are bringing the Ring of Power to Mordor. And I was a bit apprehensive going into this book because I remember not really liking it when I read it as a preteen. I found it very depressing and dull, and just in general I had a huge problem getting through it, and I skipped multiple chunks if I remember correctly. And also in the film I kind of disliked the parts that followed Frodo and Sam just because the atmosphere was so miserable and the two always had tears in their eyes, looked unhappy, were dirty and just kind of stumbling around, which is kind of insensitive, I know, but is just kind of the way I feel about it. Can't change anything about that. And yes, book number 4 is miserable from the first to the last page. Sam and Frodo are just stumbling through the land in front of Mordor. They are totally unequipped for the journey they're undertaking. They have no plan what they are up to, which is actually why they are the perfect characters to portray this very daunting journey towards Mordor. Book number 4 is also completely different in the structure to books 1 to 3, that kind of move from one event to the next. So in book number 1 and 2, that's the passage over Bree, the hilltop, Rivendell, Moria, Lorien, and then the waterfalls. Book number 2, it's Fangorn, Edoras, Helm's Deep, and then Isengard. So we have this constant building up of tension, then there's the climax, and then everything kind of falls down again, gets a bit calmer, and then the new tension is built up again, another climax, and it kind of circles around multiple times per book. And in book number 4, we don't have this circle of climaxes. Instead, there's this constant underlying tension and this constant feeling of unease with only one single climax towards the end of a book. And this, of course, gives the 4th book a completely different feeling and pacing in comparison to the first 3 books, which is probably also why I didn't really appreciate it that much when I read it the first time. The underlying tension in book number 4 just grows and grows throughout, but it rises slowly, and it's just this mounting unease that the reader feels with every step closer to Mordor. And this unease is magnified by Gollum joining the group, and the two characters, Sam and Frodo, and the reader have no idea whether one should really trust him. When is the breaking point when Gollum is going to betray the two hobbits? Maybe he won't betray them after all, maybe there'll be something completely different. You don't know what's going to happen, but you have this uneasy feeling of knowing something is going to go wrong. You just don't know what. And I think you have to really appreciate this unnerving feeling without anything bad really happening. It's more of an atmospheric tension that Tolkien builds in this book that he hasn't done so far. It's so interesting how Tolkien now takes Gollum's character. We first find out that Gollum is following the Fellowship at the end of book number 1. We know he's still following them in book number 2. And the entire time so far, the reader has been hoping that Gollum won't catch up to Sam and Frodo. You don't want him anywhere close to the ring, and even at the beginning of book number 4 you don't really want him to join the two or kind of interact with them. And now suddenly we are at this point where all our hope is put into Gollum, even though this is a situation we never wanted to happen, and you are just hoping as a reader that Smeagol, that his good side will come through, just like the other two hobbits are. And I think by adding Gollum to the story, Tolkien achieves something he hasn't been able to achieve so far, and that is to really immerse the reader and put them in the situation of Frodo and Sam, and not only experience Middle-earth, but really experience the journey and just the hardships of the journey that hasn't been that obvious so far. Because as a reader you're now challenged with the same questions as Frodo and Sam are, and that is, should one trust Gollum, and if so, how far? We have to decide whether we agree with Sam and mistrust Gollum completely, treat him badly, kind of treat him like an animal, chain him up because he's not done anything redeeming so far. Or whether you agree with Frodo to say, okay, he hasn't been trustworthy as far as we know, but Gandalf once said he's going to play his part in the story, so I guess we'll just continue on with him. And it really puts us into their situation, asking ourselves, what would we do? By using Gollum to pull the reader further into the Lord of the Rings, Tolkien is making a really interesting choice, and he is choosing to make Gollum the most complex character within the Lord of the Rings, who has so many layers and so many sides to him. He's complex, no one really understands what his deal is, and I absolutely love this choice because the Fellowship characters so far haven't been that interesting, or Tolkien hasn't shown their interesting facets yet, except for Sam, who has an awesome development arc to his character, because he starts off in book number 1 as this dull hobbit who's never left the Shire, who has this romantic obsession with elves, and really he's the last one who should be on this journey, and you kind of see him as this extra baggage. But with every step he takes on the journey to Mordor with the Fellowship, he just grows and grows. And by the time we reach book number 4, he is the character carrying the majority of a responsibility apart from the ring. So he's the one who is constantly alert, he's keeping an eye on Gollum, he is rationing the provisions and always checking up on Frodo, seeing how he's doing. And yeah, mentally he's just carrying the main load and keeping everything together. Frodo would never have got this far without Sam. The most astounding aspect to Sam's character is that he doesn't have to be there. When the Fellowship sets off, Gandalf says, or was it Elrond? Anyway, that anyone in the Fellowship can leave a quest at any point, they don't have to stay on. And Sam has decided to stay on so far, in comparison to Frodo, who, well, Frodo didn't really have a choice in the whole matter. The ring came to him, so he had to kind of go on, and he must either fail or bring the ring to the fire, whilst Sam is consciously making this decision every single day, every single minute. And I'm not saying that Frodo isn't struggling. We find out that he is physically doing a lot worse than Sam. He's walking with this huge burden, and I think they say that he's walking bent because the ring is so heavy on his neck. But we don't find out that much about his struggles, because even though we have a narrator who has a variable point of view, who kind of gives us information about Gollum sometimes about Sam, sometimes about Frodo, the narrator mostly chooses Sam's point of view, and that's how we get the majority of our information about Frodo, though of course there are exceptions. But yeah, we don't see that much of the inner struggle going on with Frodo, which is why it's a bit difficult, or it was a bit difficult for me to really see his part in the journey. By the end of book 4, you really think, well, I mean, in my opinion, you really think that Sam can just as well go on by himself just because he's doing such a great job. And I think that's why Tolkien chose to make Sam the main character of book number 4, is because you as a reader can really identify with Sam. He is this bumbling character in the beginning who, through pressure from outside and being thrown into one unknown situation after the next, is slowly growing and growing. And as a reader, you realize that you could also have been part of this expedition and been a helpful part of the expedition, no matter where your starting point is. So Sam's development arc is quite similar to Bilbo's in The Hobbit. just on a much bigger scale. The last thing I want to say about the second part of The Two Towers, so book number 4, is that this book had the most suspenseful scene in the entire series so far. I read the last chapter, and even though I knew what was going to happen, it had me on the edge of my seat. I enjoyed it so much, and I actually wish that this would have been the first time I'd experienced this scene, just because as a first-time reader, I think this would have just flabbergasted you, because the ending is not what you expect. And in general, the cliffhanger in The Two Towers is so amazing that I hope that book number 5 will pick up where book number 4 ended. I haven't picked up the Return of the King yet, so I don't know where the series will continue, but I'm looking forward so much to Frodo and Sam's journey, something I wouldn't have expected to feel when I went into book number 4. As I said, I was very apprehensive, but the ending was amazing. I'm so excited to continue with this series. Now that we've crossed the halfway point of the series, the speed of everything that's happening is really picking up, and I just know that book number 3 is going to be absolutely epic. I just can't wait for the last 2 books, and I hope you've also been enjoying the series so far and loved book number 4 the same way I did, even if it is so different to books number 2 and 3. I will be continuing with The Return of the King soon. I hope you'll continue this journey of reading The Lord of the Rings with me, and hopefully I'll see you for book number 5.